Hello everybody, it's TannerFishies here, back again with a new Ninjago video here on the channel. In today's video we are going to be discussing the last elemental power and why it might actually play into the 2022 storyline of Ninjago. So obviously the last elemental power is something that we've touched on the channel before. We haven't talked about it in a very long time, but we talked about it before, especially during the release of The Island and Seabound. Both of those seasons were rumored to feature the last elemental power due to the Book of Elemental Powers, a new book that's going to be coming out later on this year, obviously in late 2021, which is said to feature every elemental power in a list, including the final one, which of course is said to debut in the upcoming TV series. Now, because the book releases in late 2021, they could very well be talking about 2022's story, and also considering how The Island or Seabound did not mention the final elemental power at all, I think it's safe to say that the 2022 storyline will indeed feature the debut of the last or final elemental power. Now, of course, we did not get it in 2021, but the year is not over just yet. We're only about halfway through the year as of the time of recording this video, and I've already discussed on the channel how there could very well be another season of Ninjago coming out later this year. It's very unlikely and near impossible, but there is still a chance that it could happen, especially with the releases of The Island and Seabound being so early this year. There very well could be another Ninjago season down the line later on this year that could be releasing in either October or November. That would very much line up with the release of the Elemental Powers book, but more than likely we're not going to see the next season of Ninjago until 2022, which is probably where this storyline will be featured. Now, of course, in the seasons of The Island and Seabound, we did not hear or see anything regarding the last elemental power. But just to play devil's advocate for a second, there was something in Seabound especially that could very well be labeled as the final elemental power. That, of course, being the power of Wajira. Now, Wajira is going to be the first theory that we're going to be mentioning in this video, Wajira's power being labeled as the final elemental power. But the only issue is, when you break down Wajira's powers, it's essentially a combination of wind and water, which are two elements that she controlled, and two elements that the first Spinjitzu master somehow took control of and passed down through the generations. Obviously, we've had elemental masters belonging to both of those powers before. We've had masters of wind, we've had masters of water, but Wajira's powers were some kind of fusion of the two, essentially. This is being labeled as storm right now, but the elemental power of storm, if that's going to be a thing, it seems a little too similar to lightning right off the bat, which is kind of a big concern for me. Obviously, this doesn't really seem all that likely, but storm being labeled as the last elemental power, I'm going to have to admit here I wouldn't be surprised, especially considering how Wajira is an elemental being by default. If her power were to be storm, then I wouldn't really be all that shocked. I would very much accept that if storm was the last elemental power and it's some type of unholy combination between wind and water. Obviously, we saw Wajira using this power during Seabound, both in flashbacks and in the modern day. It would only make sense that the wind and water elements will be labeled as one and would become the storm elemental power by default. Now, stepping away from the Wajira theory, because honestly I really don't think that's all that likely, I feel like the 2022 storyline will indeed include the final elemental power, and I have a couple of theories as to how that could happen. Remember, 2022 is also suggested to be the conclusion of the Vengestone arc, meaning that the Vengestone Buyer, first confirmed to be a thing in Season 13, Master of the Mountain, he very well could appear in this next season, he or she depending on who the Vengestone Buyer is, because it's been rumored that the Vengestone arc is going to be concluding in 2022, and of course Vengestone and elemental powers really don't mix all that well. I think that these two storylines could connect and both be presented as one in the first storyline of 2022. Now, in terms of the Vengestone Buyer's identity, we have no idea at this moment in time who he or she is. Could very well be a brand new character, could be a returning character. It's not super clear who exactly the Vengestone Buyer is just yet. But let's pretend, for the sake of this theory, that the Vengestone Buyer is an elemental master in and of themselves. What exactly would they need Vengestone for? Now, considering how we're still rumored to see the last elemental power, I think it's safe to say that this final power might actually have to do with the Vengestone Buyer. What if the Vengestone Buyer is indeed an elemental master, but this elemental master in particular does not like his or her power? Maybe the power is something terrible that hurts you. Maybe it's something that's a little self-destructive, and maybe the Vengestone Buyer wants to get rid of his power, therefore he would need to constantly surround himself with Vengestone and get rid of his power that way. I could totally see this happening. Like I said, the Vengestone arc was introduced in Season 13, and it featured the Skull Sorcerer trying to collect and mine a large quantity of Vengestone to sell off to a mysterious buyer. The intentions of this buyer were unknown. All we knew during that season was that the Skull Sorcerer wanted desperately to sell off his large amount of Vengestone. This could be for any particular reason, but I feel like if it's for a reason such as this, that would make a fair bit of sense, especially considering how the Vengestone Buyer, we still don't know who he or she is. They could very well be a descendant of an elemental master, perhaps harnessing some type of elemental elemental power that's very brutal and self-destructive in nature. That could be why maybe they want to collect a large amount of Vengestone to try to cancel out their own destructive elemental power. I really do enjoy this theory quite a bit. The only roadblock that I could point out though is where exactly would the conflict fall into place here. Obviously with Vengestone, Shintaro has a large quantity of that, and if the ninja needed Vengestone, they could totally go to Shintaro and just ask Vanya for some. I think that's a very obvious thing. But with the Vengestone Buyer, I feel like they are collecting Vengestone for a more sinister reason. If the ninja were to battle a character that just wants Vengestone to heal themselves, that would be kind of uncharacteristically evil of the ninja. I feel like the ninja would do everything in their power to help out this character, especially if their elemental power is too destructive. Maybe they could help this character learn to control their power. But maybe the Vengestone Buyer himself or herself, whoever he or she ends up being, maybe they don't want help from the ninja, and maybe the power is just too strong for the ninja to combat in that way. Maybe they can't help. I could totally see this theory working only if specific conditions are met, but in terms of an actual conflict, let's go ahead and move on to another theory. Now this theory is a classic one. The Vengestone Buyer wants to collect all of the Vengestone in order to cancel out all of the elemental powers across Ninjago. This is a storyline that a lot of Ninjago fans want to see, and I personally think that this story could be very well done if executed correctly. I feel like having a character that wants to be rid of all elemental powers across all of Ninjago, that could very much make for a very interesting storyline, especially if the Vengestone Buyer is indeed an elemental master in and of themselves. Like I said, the Vengestone Buyer may possess a very powerful elemental power, and maybe they want their power to be the only one throughout Ninjago. That would explain why they're collecting Vengestone. Maybe they want to just capture and imprison all of the elemental masters, so that way they could be the only proper elemental master on the scene. And that would especially showcase conflict with the ninja. And depending on what this elemental power actually is, I think it's safe to say that the ninja might actually have their hands full this time. Now, I feel like that theory is a little bit more expected. I'm more expecting the ninja to be battling someone who just wants to get rid of elemental powers in general, and not somebody that wants to cancel out their own element. That seems to be the most likely to me. Another possibility that I want to talk about though is that maybe the Vengestone Buyer does not have an elemental power, and perhaps the final elemental power is referring to the only elemental power left in existence. Maybe all of the ninja lose their powers except for one, and that ninja's power would be labeled as the last elemental power because it's the only one that exists. Which ninja would be the one to keep their power? I don't know. Maybe the Vengestone Buyer just wants to cancel out everybody's powers for some reason, and only one of the ninja's powers gets canceled out. It seems a little unlikely, and if I had to pick a more likely option, it would be that the Vengestone Buyer would probably just want to collect all of Vengestone because, like I said, they want to cancel out every other power across Ninjago and potentially leave only theirs active, or just get rid of elemental powers in general. Honestly, when you think about it, anything is possible regarding the last elemental power and the Vengestone Buyer. Whether or not these two storylines will cross over is up for debate. I feel like they totally could though. Now regarding another loose end from season 15, or Seabound, whatever you want to call it, how exactly would Nia fit into all of this? Honestly, like I said in several videos before, Nia doesn't have to reappear right away. I feel like if they wanted to hold off on reintroducing Nia, they totally could. I feel like they should solve the Vengestone problem first, and then maybe lean into the Nia storyline. If they totally wanted to bring her in though, she could definitely work into the story in some way, shape, or form. Maybe the Vengestone Buyer wants to get rid of Nia specifically because of how powerful she is now, but then if that's the case, why would he have been collecting Vengestone all the way back to the time of season 13? Doesn't make much sense. Like I said, Nia doesn't have to appear in the next season, and if I had my way, she wouldn't. I feel like her return has to be its own story in general, and it shouldn't really be lumped in with a storyline such as this one. Either way, I think the last elemental power could very well be featured in the Vengestone arc, and whether or not the Vengestone arc will end next year is up for debate, of course, but I feel like it's highly likely that the first storyline of 2022 will probably feature the Vengestone arc's conclusion and the last elemental power. If I had to nail down a solid theory, I would say that the Vengestone Buyer is probably an elemental master themselves and wants to get rid of all elemental powers throughout all of Ninjago to leave only his power the only one active. Maybe he could be a false hero, or maybe he could just long for total destruction. Who knows for sure? Either way, I feel like we will see the storyline play out next year at some point in time, whether it be in the first half of 2022 or the second half. That's going to pretty much wrap it up for this video here today, you guys. I apologize if this video was kind of hard to navigate. I just wanted to express some various theories regarding the elemental power, or at least the last elemental power, that's rumored to be coming out at some point in 2022. If you had any suggestions as to what the last elemental power could be, feel free to leave a comment down below stating that, and leave a comment down below talking about what you thought of the video itself. That's going to pretty much wrap it up for my thoughts here today, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and check out the links down down below in the description from other forms of social media. As always, big shout out goes out to my Patreon supporters, including once again the marvelous Jan. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video once again. My name is TannerFishies, and with that I bid you farewell.